name's David Gallo. I'm the director of the AIFC Academy of Law. We'd like to welcome all of you from literally across the globe who have joined us today for our 1-hour learning and development event. This is part of a series of webinars that the Academy of Law has been hosting on a complimentary basis over the past several months. We're very pleased and happy to have you with us today. First and foremost, we hope you're well, we hope you're staying safe, and we very much respect that you are continuing to move forward your business or your law firm, even in these somewhat odd, strange times that we find ourselves in. So with that, I'm very pleased and excited today to turn the floor over to my friend and colleague who will introduce today's expert speaker from the Astana Financial Services Authority. And with that, let me introduce Dr. Professor Alexander Van de Putte. Dr. Van de Putte is the chairman of the Academic Council of the Academy of Law. He's the chief strategy officer at the AIFC, and he's the chairman of the corporate governance and stewardship function at the IE Business School in Spain, which is one of Europe's leading business schools. He's a professor of strategy and strategic foresight. With that, Alexander, please.
Thank you, David, for this eloquent introduction. I have to make sure that I say a little bit more about Michael, because obviously he is the speaker today, and I'm only providing a short introduction. So good afternoon, everybody in Nur Sultan, and of course, Michael is currently in Hastings, United Kingdom, so good morning in the UK. So today, the focus is going to be on the introduction to enforcement. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Michael Howard, because he's not only a colleague, he's also a friend. He works with the Astana Financial Services Authority, which is obviously part of the AIFC. It's our independent regulator. And Michael will talk about 3 topics. The first one is the introduction to the role of the Enforcement Division. Secondly, he also will talk about how Enforcement Division works with supervision under the risk-based approach. And then finally, he's going to talk about AFSA approach to informants matters and information on the process that needs to be adhered to. Now, Michael has significant experience, both in the financial services sector, I believe about 7 years, both working for banks, but also for Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority, but also, and interestingly, as a detective superintendent in both operational policing and in crime investigation. So to all the participants, beware. You're in very good company with Michael. So what I'm going to do now myself, I'm going to go on mute, and I'll hand over the floor to Michael. And by the way, if he runs over, we will not enforce that he's spending more than the 1-hour time. So Michael, the floor to yours, and we're looking forward to an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I hope you can hear me. My name is Mike Howard. You've heard my experience. Today's presentation is actually, there are no secrets here. It's all public knowledge. I was brought into AFSA to establish the Enforcement Division, and using my experience from Qatar and my experience in the financial sector, I've taken elements of other independent financial centers, as well as best practice from IOSCO, to form our enforcement policy. So could I have the first slide, please? Thank you, Jeff. So the Enforcement Division is a very independent division of the authority, and it's headed by myself. We are committed to maintaining the highest standards of behavior and addressing conduct that may cause damage to our reputation or stability. We have a framework that enables us to take enforcement action when contraventions of law occur. So who actually are we? We are responsible for maintaining the reputation and integrity of the regulatory regime. That means standards of behavior, and it is a key component in the operation of a regulator. What do? We have a very wide remit, actually. At present, it's a very small division consisting of just myself and one senior associate, but it is anticipated this will grow organically according to demand by up to 4 or 5 staff by hopefully 2023. We're responsible for working with colleagues. So basically, principally supervision, where we help to identify conduct that harms or poses a risk. We work in support of colleagues to ensure that our action is in support of the AFSA's overall objectives. We assess complaints, concerns and allegations. Now, this is a very wide remit. This is not just about referrals from supervision. We are often after looking to areas that are not strictly in our remit, and I'll come on to that a bit more later. We plan and carry out investigations into contraventions, and we provide advice, guidance, clarification and interpretation. One of our advantages here is we are not lawyers, but we are experienced investigators and enforcement professionals, which often bring a different perspective than lawyers. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I've already covered that. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm forgetting to ask for the slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the main reasons we draft the case-related documents and present recommendations for decision-making purposes. And the reason behind this is we are an independent unit. We have no part in the decision-making process because when you investigate a case, you do become influenced to some extent by your own personal take on the case. So what we strive to do is present factual recommendations based on the actual facts that we are aware of, and we hand it over to a decision-making body, which we have no role or vote in. And I think this is the essence of the transparency which we're striving to achieve. Obviously, if there's action to be taken quickly, such as when investors are losing money or clients or customers are losing money, we will intercede appropriately and proportionally. In that we would apply to court if necessary for injunctions or freezing orders to make sure that people weren't getting away with the money they've appropriated, if that is the case. Obviously, one of our roles is the drafting and maintaining of the policies. We review our policies every 12 months and we change them in light of best practice. We try and avoid the overly bureaucratic process and try our best to exercise our powers in a proportionate, fair, transparent, and pragmatic manner. Next slide, please. When we do take enforcement action, we publicize the outcome. And this has a twofold reason: to inform the community that if they commit these breaches or contraventions of the AFSA law, this is what will happen, and also to deter others from committing them. One of the biggest things we do is we commence and manage litigation in the AIFC court. So when we make a decision to impose a financial penalty, the person we impose it on is free to go to the court and appeal our decision. This is one of the more time-consuming and complex areas of our work, because it involves evidence and witness statements, and we have to prove everything in front of a court. Obviously, what we do promotes the importance and benefits of compliance with the laws, and we try and keep the community informed. Now, our policies are on our public website, and everything I say today is accessible by the public. We work closely with all regulatory bodies, home and abroad, and share information and best practice. And as I said earlier, the IOSCO relationship we have an MMOU with them, and their best practice has informed part of our enforcement procedures, along with the best practice of the other international financial centers. Next slide, please. So internally, we have regular weekly meetings, and in those meetings, we discuss case developments. So we maintain a tracker updated weekly with the progress. As you're probably aware or not, investigations are very organic, and occasionally they throw up things that you were not aware of before. So investigations can branch out to bigger investigations. So it's very important that we have a weekly progress, and we propose goals and milestones. So we set time limits and we try and achieve them. We do a bi-weekly report to the executive body. That hasn't happened yet because we haven't had too much demand for our services. And as and when we have a significant case, we will submit a report to the board. We also obviously contribute to the annual report. Next slide, please. So during an investigation, we often need to use outside service providers, and these do provide challenges. So we use subject matter experts. We may use accountants, tax experts. We may have to employ other investigators to come in to assist with the workload. Computer forensic firms, in this day and age, a lot of evidence is online, and obviously using computer forensic firms is essential to finding out what information has been deleted, lost, because they can recover it. We use legal counsel to validate our recommendations at every step of the discipline process. When we conduct interviews, we need transcripts to serve on the people we've interviewed, and receive their feedback. And of course, we need also to establish service of the requisite documents. Now, under the Financial Service Framework Regulations, we are obliged to serve documents on various people, and we need to prove to the court that this has been done. So we often need independent firms within the country of service to conduct that service. Next slide, please. So basically, at the moment, we are involved with the whistleblowing effort within AFSA. We were responsible for the logging and initial investigation, particularly for the responsibility of the confidentiality of the person providing the information. This may change because the AIFC has recently introduced its ethics code and is looking to introduce a speaking up program organization-wide. So this may change, but at the moment, AFSA has its own whistleblowing, if you like, hotline. I prefer the term speaking up. And basically, if we get any information, we make sure it's investigated promptly and quickly, and we get back to the informant if they're willing to talk to us. And we undertake to retain the confidentiality of their identity in case they have steps taken against them by their bosses or the person they are whistleblowing against. Next slide, please. Thank you, Jeff. We are alerted to contraventions in many ways, but principally by complaints from the public, calls to the speaking up line or whistleblowing line, and by affected or injured parties who are often customers of firms within the AIFC. Also by anonymous and other tips, especially media. We often get WhatsApps and social media information that show websites that have been manufactured alleging that companies are related to the AIFC when in fact they're not. So that's one of the many things we deal with. And obviously we get referrals from other regulators. We haven't as yet had any from within Kazakhstan, actually, or from overseas, because we are a very young organization. And of course, the principal one is through our own supervisory activities. Next slide, please. Right, this is the second part, and I'll go into the risk-based approach. This is the relationship we have with supervision, and I'll go through it quite quickly, and I'll welcome any questions at the end or through chat. Next slide, please. So the object of this is to understand our approach. So the risk-based approach enables us to focus on the risk, and that means we categorize the risk and we attend to the higher risk first. All our objectives are contained in the Financial Service Framework Regulations. Next slide, please. And these are actually in the regulations. You can read them yourself, but they are self-explanatory. Control and supervision of financial activities, financial markets fair, efficient, transparent and orderly, fair, transparent and non-discriminatory conditions, very important, and equally important, fostering and maintaining confidence in the financial system. Next slide, please. These again are in the law. Stability, restraining actions that may cause damage. This is very important, protecting the interests of investors. And to me, that's one of the key issues of our system and implementing a regulatory regime that complies with international standards, which we have done. Next slide, please. So our objectives, we're trying to foster the development of technologies. Obviously, that's everybody's objective at the moment. And pursuing other objectives, that's quite a strange one to me. It could be from the Board of Governors, the Kazakh's national law, or a specific kind of objective related to best practice from overseas regulators or improvements or changes in technology. Next slide, please. Right, the supervision arm, how do they do that? Well, they maintain close relationships. This means frequent interaction with key staff, both verbally and by telephone, formally and informally, and by constant written communication. This is not to say we become best friends with them, but it enables supervisors to get a proper feel about how the business is progressing and whether the problems, whether any problems are manifesting themselves. Cooperate. Obviously, we cooperate with overseas regulators to ensure the home company is properly regulated, and assist the branch by trying not to burden it with too many restrictions or duplication of restrictions imposed by their home regulator. We maintain a continuous cycle of risk management, so we continuously assess and classify the risk of a company depending on the information available. And we focus on achieving our objectives by using our tools that we have. And I'm going to move on to the tools in a moment. Next slide, please. That is a summary of how we approach it. I'll leave it up there for a few seconds. And then next slide, please. So the risk assessment framework, it's a continuous cycle. So we tackle two broad risk areas: business risks and control structure risks. And the risk assessment begins when a company applies to join the AFSA. Next slide, please. So, let's go through these. Financial soundness. This is risks arising from the firm's capital position, liquidity mix, nature of its earnings, etc. There's a lot of things that have risk around that. Business strategy, okay, the nature of the business undertaken by the firm, and it's broken down even further into risk factors such as clients, products, and markets. Market and operational risk. Well, there's the firm's exposure to market risk, and again, liquidity risk, insurance underwriting, and the nature of the contractual engagements. Let's move on to the human and technical risk. Next slide, please. So human and technical resources. Let's start with clients. Now, clients arise from the manner in which the authorized firm conducts business with clients, and includes the fact that we don't become best friends. It enables supervisors to get a feel about how the business is progressing and whether any problems are manifesting themselves. We cooperate. Conflict management is risks identified from the manager in which the authorized firm identifies and manages conflicts of interest, particularly in the remuneration of sales staff and the personal account dealing of staff. Management and control, that's risks arising from that area, such as compliance, risks, and outsourcing. Okay, and then human and technical resources. These are risks arising from the designated and approved individuals within a firm and the adequacy of the firm's information technology, both from the point of efficiency and records and money laundering and sanctions detection and prevention. Next slide, please. Thank you, Jeff. So the risk assessment is undertaken at the first stage, as I said earlier. So supervision, once the company is authorized, supervision will meet with the senior management to discuss the overall goals of the company. And depending on their feedback, this will inform when the first on-site supervision is made. Next slide, please. So following the next on-site supervision, and that's a visit to the premises and a chat with the main individuals, they will arrive at possibly a different risk assessment, and then this may be updated as further information comes in. As you're all aware, firms have to regularly put in returns, liquidity returns, etc., and they have to have their policies and their governance in place. These are all reviewed, and if something is perceived to be wrong, then that is usually addressed by supervision until it gets very bad, in which case it may be referred to enforcement as an issue. There are other trigger events such as, you know, huge material changes, the business changes totally, or all the top personnel leave, or we're made aware of a significant failure in systems and controls. Next slide, please. So the risk assessment process is then an ongoing business, and obviously it's on-site visits, personal meetings. We do desk-based reviews. We ask them for their policies and procedures and review them in the office. We can actually require them to produce information to us, when we request it, if we're inquiring into a particular matter. And we can also require them to produce a report. We can nominate a person that's approved by us to create that report. It depends what it's about. It could be an audit report on the finances, or it could be a different type of report on the governance structure or the risk management. Next slide, please. Right, now we'll move to the final part, which is AFSA's approach to the enforcement and the process of enforcement. So next slide, please. Basically, in our approach, we have to act flexibly, decisively, but with fairness and integrity, and bear in mind that the process we go through is public knowledge, it's online, and it's open, available to all AIFC participants. We keep the community involved, and we are very, very committed to our international cooperation. So if we're requested by a an overseas regulator to take some action, we will assist them under not only our current MOUs, but the fact that that is our policy. Next slide, please. So following a referral to enforcement, the first step of the process is that we will provide an assessment. Now, this assessment report is sort of an interim investigation report, and it is based on the information available at the time. And enforcement will then provide that report, which is a factual report, to our decision-making body. Now, in AFSA, our decision-making body is the Enforcement Committee. And the Enforcement Committee is a group of 4 directors, and they can be different directors, but they're experienced in their fields. They have experience in the financial industry. And Enforcement Division will present the assessment report, but as I said earlier, we are independent of the outcome. We do not vote on what happens. So it is the Enforcement Committee that decide and instruct further action. Next slide, please. There are many criteria involved in the assessment, and some of them are obvious, some are less obvious. But obviously, whether we have jurisdiction is one of them, whether it's a strategic or significantly important matter, the nature of it, deliberate, reckless, or minor, the seriousness. Next slide, please. I'll just go through these very quickly. The effect, because the effect of the misconduct on customers is a very big factor in whether we take action against the authorized firm or not. The frequency and nature, the likelihood of the misconduct being proved. We cannot proceed with the case unless we are confident that we can prove it in a court. So that is a very important matter in the assessment process. Obviously, the previous disciplinary record is an issue. If the firm has been fined many times before for similar things, they'll be more likely to have a more serious finding. And the subsequent conduct, whether or not they mitigate what they've done or whether they just continue. Next slide, please. So whether they offer assistance to anybody who's lost anything, the remedies that are available to us, the remedies practically available to the victims, and whether an outside authority is likely to take action, which is quite possible, or has requested to do so. Next slide, please. So whether the conduct undermines or damages our efficiency and transparency, obviously is incredibly important. This is the keystone to what we stand for. And we are the gatekeepers to protect the integrity and financial stability and reputation of the AFSA. Next slide, please. So the Enforcement Committee can make a number of decisions, and this is based on not a full investigation report. This is an assessment report. So they can immediately take disciplinary action if sufficient facts exist, or they can elect to commence an investigation, and this means a full investigation is launched. And then we go into another process, which I'll cover in my workshop next week, which is the process after a full investigation and disciplinary proceedings against an AIFC company. We can refer the misconduct to another authority if it's more appropriate. And quite often we refer it back to supervision to take some form of supervisory action, which is often a less harsh way of going the enforcement route, and in many occasions, on many occasions, is to be preferred. They can also say take no further action, or they consider any other action they deem necessary. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll break down the investigation in my presentation next week, but I can say that by their nature, investigations vary from very straightforward to extremely complex, and they can take from 2 months to 1 or 2 years to complete. It's impossible to set a timeline for an investigation because, again, as I said earlier, very often during the investigation, it throws up new areas that you weren't aware of that also need investigating. And at the conclusion of the investigation, we produce a factual report and give it back to the enforcement committee, who will again convene and decide, make the decision as to what they want to do with it. Now, again, at the end of the investigation and in possession of the report, they have a number of things they can decide. Next slide, please. They take into account a number of factors. Obviously, the seriousness and nature, the conduct of the firm, the history, and any guidance we've previously issued. Next slide, please. Similar cases in the AFSA, if it's happened before, previous disciplinary decisions we've made, and we do take into account actions by regulators in other jurisdictions. Now, if the enforcement committee does decide to go for a financial penalty, we provide them with a note showing the financial penalties made by various jurisdictions around the world, including the other international financial centers, and of course, respected international regulators such as the UK, the US, Australia, to give them a benchmark as to how much the financial penalty may be. Next slide, please. So when the enforcement committee considers the completed investigation report, which is a factual report and can be 100 pages long, you know, if it depends on the investigation, but they can decide to take no action. They can censure a firm or an individual publicly. They can impose financial penalties, and this is probably what people know most about enforcement. And as I've said, we do give them benchmarks, so they decide the amount they consider is appropriate for the particular incident. And there are so many factors involved that each incident is unique. They may impose prohibitions or restrictions. So authorized individuals within the firms may be banned from operating in the financial center or banned totally for periods of 5, 10, 15 years. That is possible. We can require that the firm undergoes an enforceable undertaking, or at the end of the day, we can take them to the AIFC court and let the court decide what is appropriate. Next slide, please. I think that's it. I've packed it all in quite quickly. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions from anyone.
Thank you so much, Mike. My colleague Almas is on the line. Almas, do we have questions that have come in for Mike Howard?
Yes, we have several questions. So first question is from Nurlan. His question is, who are the enforcers in the territory of Kazakhstan? Is it private beliefs? Do they have additional powers in the execution of the AFC court decisions?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Who are the enforcers in the territory of Kazakhstan? Is it private beliefs?
In Kazakhstan, the Republic of Kazakhstan, the enforcers is the National Bank and the National Regulatory Authority, the ARB. Our enforcement is restricted to the AIFC and companies within the AIFC.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, how can AFC court and the International Arbitration Center judgments be enforced outside the AFC?
That has yet to be tested, but they can be enforced outside the AIFC according to the current legal framework we have. And as far as I know, this has not been tested yet.
Okay, thank you. And one question is from Ainur. She is asking, is there a conflict when enforcing the common law-based decision in other legal system?
No, because we are working under a common law environment. So that is what we use as our benchmark. We are enforcing for the AIFC only, and the AIFC is under common law.
Okay, I guess that's it for now. No.
I'd be
Okay.
very happy if anybody wants to email me with questions, please do.
Excellent. Okay, Mike Howard, I'd like to thank you today for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. We're honored to have you, and we look forward to seeing you next week, August 13th, where you will deliver modules 3 and 4 in this program on the topics of the discipline process, as well as opening, planning, and conducting investigations. So we very much look forward to seeing you again next week. And again, we appreciate your time. To all of our participants and audience members, thanks so much for joining us. Stay tuned. We hope to see you again soon. Michael, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay, goodbye.
And thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.